Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Dario Fo's play Trumpets and Raspberries, which is a satire because this is Dario Fo and satire is what he does, but it also has a lot of much more traditional comic elements, like misidentifications of people, comic misunderstandings, different types of mistakes like this, in addition to the satire of the politically powerful, of the role of capital within society, the role of the police or security forces, etc., etc., that are very common themes in Fo's work. So the play starts out with Rosa, who is brought into the hospital to identify the mangled, almost beyond recognition, body of her husband, Antonio. Antonio works in a Fiat factory. He's a lined worker, a welder. Nobody is quite sure exactly how he got as injured as he did. It wasn't an incident at work, and so nobody's really completely sure. But basically, he's almost completely physically destroyed. Like, his ears are recognizable. Rosa identifies him. Now, Rosa and Antonio are estranged because Antonio has taken up with Lucia, who's she's a middle-class socialist. So they're working-class socialists. She's a middle-class socialist, more of an intellectual type, etc., etc. And so there's tension, obviously, between Lucia and Rosa. But Rosa figures she can help nurse Antonio back to health, and then he will come back to her. While that scene is going on, that first scene where she is identifying his body, Antonio comes in, and this is a Brechtian moment where basically the action of the play is interrupted so that a character can give us information that we otherwise wouldn't have. So Antonio comes in and says, "Hey, actually, that's not me. Here's what happened. Crazy story. I was in a car parked along the side of the road, having sex with this other woman, not Lucia or my wife Rosa, when these other two cars came speeding along and crashed. I tried to rescue the people from them, including this one guy who I dragged out, and he was all bashed up, and then the car burst into flames and he lit on fire, and I used my jacket to try and put him out. The woman that I was with ran off, so she can't really corroborate all of this. But I then put that guy into my car to take him and basically drop him off with paramedics. And that's where we are. We then go back to Rosa, where she positively identifies Antonio's body. And the surgeons say, "Great, can you give us some fairly recent pictures of him? We will do facial reconstruction because all of this is destroyed." So they're going to build him a new face. And they're going to build the face based on the pictures Rosa gives them of Antonio. Antonio, meanwhile, has gone home to Lucia, and she reveals to him that the person he rescued was Gianni Agnelli. Yeah, Gianni Agnelli, who is the owner of Fiat, one of the richest and most powerful industrialists in Italy, the person that Antonio works for, the person who exploits his labor, etc., etc., the person that his union believes effectively is Satan incarnate, etc., etc. So the police are looking for Antonio because they believe he was involved in the kidnapping of Agnelli. Antonio essentially goes into hiding for much of the core of the play, while the man who has been sort of facially reconstructed is recovering. His face has been rebuilt on the model of Antonio's face. He doesn't remember anything about who he is or what happened to him, etc., etc. So we've got that whole memory loss bit, which is a great comic bit, very, very common in comedy. He doesn't recognize Rosa, and he gradually, like, they do things like they take him to the Fiat factory, and he's very much comfortable and at home there. Then they put him on the line and put a welding gun in his hand, and he's like, no, I'm not doing this crap labor. And so he slowly comes to realize, as he's rebuilding his body, rebuilding his ability to speak, etc., etc., that he's not Antonio Berardi, he's actually Gianni Agnelli. The problem is he now has the face of Antonio Berardi. So, that's going to be the cause of a bunch of misunderstandings, especially as we get into Act 2. Now, Act 2 actually opens with a set of security people, various kinds of like secret agents and things like this, actually coming into Rosa's house, which is where most of the action in Act 2 is set. And they basically stake the place out. And they do it in these very, like, cartoonish ways. Like, they take away her chest of drawers, and they put in a new one with a slot cut into each of the drawers so that the chief secret agent can hide in this cupboard. And then they put a soup tureen on over his head to hide his head. One guy hides in the television, and then when they later turn the TV on, they see him, and he has to, like, mime reading the news and all this stuff. It's cartoonish, and they continually move the furniture around to try and hear better what people are saying and all this stuff. Antonio, real Antonio, comes to Rosa's house. Basically, he's been hiding out for months because he doesn't want to be caught by the police, and he's desperate. He's ready to be done. So he comes to Rosa's house, and she's like, "Well, no, I'll hide you. Just go in the other room, etc., etc." Then Agnelli, who again looks like Antonio, shows up. He's basically escaped from the hospital because he wants to figure out how to convince everybody that he is Agnelli and not Antonio. So he's escaped from the hospital. He's come to Rosa's house, and she thinks that they're the same man. So a lot of the action in Act 2 is about that sort of shell game of Antonio will be in one room, Agnelli will be in another, or one of them will come and one of them will go. Interestingly, Agnelli eats and drinks through a tube in his neck, like his esophagus and stuff like that. He's not yet recovered, so he has a tube in his neck that he has to attach a tube with a funnel and pour liquid food down it. And for more solid food, he has this fairly horrific kind of like hood thing with two nostril pieces that go up his nose, so the food can drop down the back of his throat. I don't know if that's actually like physically how things work, because I don't know anything about biology, but you have Antonio and Agnelli, both of whom are very hungry. Agnelli needs to eat through this tube or through the thing, because it's very painful, presumably, to have sausages and whatnot ground up and stuffed down your nose. He tells Rosa, basically, tie me down, whatever I say, don't stop, because I need to eat. Unfortunately, Agnelli goes out, Antonio comes in, and because Rosa doesn't know that this is two different men, she tries to feed Antonio by sticking a tube in his neck. Unfortunately, he doesn't have a tube hole, so the soup just sort of spills down his front. Then she tries to grind these sausages into his nose through these tubes, and basically the police then show up and actually managed to put a stop to it and save Antonio. So they arrest Antonio, but then the police come back to investigate, and what we find out is that Agnelli has written letters to chief politicians, top politicians, as well as the police, etc., etc. And actually, when I say written letters, what he's actually done is copied letters from a previous major kidnapping. There was a kidnapping of Aldo Moro previous to this, and Moro had written letters basically saying, the terrorists who have kidnapped me, the people who kidnapped me, are demanding X thing. Please, the state of Italy, the government of Italy, give in to what they want. And essentially the line that the government took was, we're not going to negotiate with terrorists. And so Moro was killed. So what Agnelli says, he explains why he sent these letters. He copied the letters out because the letters that Moro had sent are part of the public record at this point, I guess. They're available in books and things like this. Agnelli copies them out, makes minor changes to update them, knowing that everybody will recognize them as copies of the letters that Moro had sent. But what he explains when Rosa and Lucia confront him about this is, well, I want to find out what the government and the state think of me, what value I have for them. I want to see whether the government and the parties will have the nerve to sacrifice me as they sacrificed Aldo Moro. I want to see whether, in my case too, they will reject any exchange even with a prisoner who was seriously ill. In order for me to be released, I'm asking for 32 to be set free. 32 political prisoners, all healthy in mind and limb. I've checked them one by one, and I want to see if they're going to order a blackout with the newspapers like they did during the D'Orso kidnapping. I'll go out and buy all the newspapers, including Peanuts and Teenage Romance. So basically, Agnelli has taken this situation where the police believe he's being held by terrorists, of whom they believe Antonio is the leader. And Agnelli is trying to gauge his power as an industrialist over the state of Italy. So eventually we find out, he says later in the play, the inspectors come back, etc., etc. They're all sort of sitting around, trying to work out what has happened and why there's two Antonios, etc., etc. And Agnelli says, listen, the whole cabinet has met and issued a communique. Here it is under the headline, Kidnap Chaos, Cabinet Caves In. Yes. In the Moro case, the state answered no exchange. This time it must answer yes. All in unison say no. Agnelli says no, yes. The prisoners asked for an exchange will be set free today. All in unison say, oh no. Agnelli, still reading, says yes. We're aware that after the 32 prisoners have been released, Agnelli's jailers might demand the release of an unlimited number of further prisoners. In order to prevent this, then they all in unison say, well. Agnelli says, the cabinet, with the approval of the various organs of state, has decided to free all political prisoners already serving sentences. They all in unison say, no. Agnelli says, yes, and also the prisoners awaiting trial. So basically, this is how the comedy aspect of it wraps up, right? Because comedies, pretty much by definition, have happy endings. And so Antonio is going to be set free because of this deal that Agnelli made. Agnelli is sort of vindicated for himself, at least, if not necessarily for the workers of Italy, as someone who is of value and political, socio-cultural, and economic importance to the Italian state, etc., etc. And so we have satire here of the police, because the police are corrupt, they're incompetent, they're violent, etc., etc. But ultimately the biggest satire, I think, the biggest satirical point that Fo makes in Trumpets and Raspberries is precisely the power of the industrialist, right? The power of capital over the state. The state doesn't serve the people of Italy. The state serves capital. And that, for Fo, as a dedicated leftist, is something worthy of ridicule.